This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by Linode, high-performance cloud hosting for everyone. Visit linode.com/MacVoices and take $20 off your first server package. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, this is the second part of our discussion with Bart Busschots. In the first part, we talked about his two training programs, Taming the Terminal and Programming by Stealth. This time around, though, we get into a discussion of security and privacy and Zoom and where you fit into that equation, what responsibilities you should be accepting. So I think you will enjoy it. Here's Bart. So tell me a little bit, and don't tell me anything you shouldn't tell me, obviously. But
no, don't worry.
You had an e-learning application service, whatever, in place. Yeah. How many issues? How big an issue was it to go from scaling to what I'm sure, compared to what you're doing now, was a relatively small to a much larger, having the need for a much more robust e-learning system?
Okay, so this is where we get into a very important distinction. So an e-learning system, a course management system, is different to a virtual classroom, right? We didn't have remote teaching. We didn't have virtual classrooms. What we had was our e-learning system, which is where you would get your lecture notes, where you would submit assignments. There would be forums there. There might be quizzes there for continuous assessment, all sorts of resources. But it's not an online classroom. Right? It still isn't. So we actually had to transition to using what we had. So we're Office 365. That meant Microsoft Teams. So we basically had to provide the resources to allow our lecturers to deliver their lectures over Microsoft Teams, which the product can do that, but we had never prepared the materials to teach our staff to do that. So for us, it was a matter of preparing resources, figuring out, there are 20 million ways you could use Teams. There are 20 million buttons you could push. What is the simplest set of instructions we can devise to produce the most effective virtual classroom from the tools at our disposal, right? No time for procurement, right? We're public sector, we would have to go to tender. It will take us months to procure. We can't procure. Sort of a bit like Apollo 13. These are the pieces you have. Assemble a working air filter, okay? These are the pieces of software we own. Assemble a virtual classroom. You are not allowed to use anything we don't already own. And so that week was spent figuring out what is it we want to ask our lecturers to do. And once we figured out the what, how do we describe that in the most human-friendly, absorbable, non-intimidating, easy to understand way possible? So it was a 2-half week. The first half was decide what we wanted to share. And the second half was, how do we effectively communicate this? How do we put our message across so as to provide the least stress and the most effectiveness? So we basically had to repurpose what we owned. Now, we did also have to adjust the resources on our cloud service for the actual e-learning system, because its usage just changed, because everything had to go through there. Because there was no physical presence for anything. Absolutely everything the lecturers were doing had to go through that now, whereas that wouldn't have been the case while they were on campus. But in the case of a cloud service, software as a service, you just say, scale it up. And the bill gets bigger. But ultimately, it's someone else's problem, right? They turn up the dials in Azure or whatever. Yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to step to something that... you use Teams, okay, but not everybody has that option.
Yeah, so the reason we use Teams is because we had Teams, right? Like I said, we couldn't procure anything. And the thing with Teams is it's really, 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 really designed for an enterprise use. And its strength, while you can have guests on a Teams call, its focus and its strength is on an internal tool within an organization. Teams, it's in the name, right? It's not strangers and friends, it's a team. Which is why it's never going to be what gets families together for a virtual Seder or for a virtual Passover or for a virtual Easter dinner or wine with friends or a board game over the internet or whatever, right? What you need for that is a very, very different kind of service where it's not about a bunch of people or sorry, not about a bunch of people who together procure a product for groupware. It's about ordinary people with no money who want to share with each other easily without an IT department. And one of the things Zoom has always done is prioritize usability. Now, they have done so to the point where they have been the most generous we could say is careless, but they have done things deeply unethical in the pursuit of the extremely noble goal of making their software really easy to use. Last summer must have been their low point, where their installer installed a web server so they could automatically reinstall their client after you uninstalled it, so you could join a meeting from a web link. That is very convenient to join a meeting from a web link. But installing a backdoor into everyone's computer, which it turned out was a backdoor with a bug in it that turned it into a remote exploit, that was deeply irresponsible. So their motivation was noble. But the execution, right? But they learned from that, right? No matter how critical you want to be of them, they learned from that.
Well, and thank you, because that's exactly where I wanted to go. I wanted to go to the Zoom thing, because right now we're in the midst, as we record this, the last week and a half has been kind of tough on Zoom, because it seems like everybody's coming out and blaming them. Now, I'm the first one to tell you that I've done Zoom meetings. In fact, I've been using Zoom up until recently to record MacVoices. And one of the reasons we're not using it right now is simply the fact that they've been so overwhelmed that they had to turn down the quality of their recordings. That is not a complaint. I completely understand. No. I'd much rather have Zoom there to accomplish things, as opposed to not having it there but having the quality back. So completely understandable.
That's the right trade-off, right? Yeah, you turn down the quality so you can keep the volume where it's needed, and lots of people are relying on it to keep their family life together. So I think it's absolutely the right thing to do. No criticism. You would be the perfect example of this. So you would agree that the reason Zoom is so popular is because of two things. A, it's easy to use, right? You email someone a Zoom link, and they do not need any skill whatsoever. They open that link in their favorite browser and they can do a video call with you. I mean, is there anything in the world easier than being a part of a Zoom conversation? I don't think so.
No, absolutely. And it's one of the things that I think has been brilliant about Zoom is just that fact. I mean, if I can take that link and I can publish it, which of course that's another story we'll talk about.
Sure. I mean, there's also reasons why you want to be careful with doing that, but fundamentally it is easy. And the other thing it has going for it is that it works really well. And I know some people, Allison in particular, who has been trying some alternatives. And if you have 2 or 3 people in a conversation, there's lots of products work fine. If you have 5 or 6, 7 or 8, 9 or 10, let alone 11 or 12, most of them fall over in a great big gooey heap.
Yes.
Zoom doesn't. Zoom will happily work away with a call with a dozen people. Not a pretend dozen, an actual 12 different streams all at the same time. Mm-hmm. And yes, Microsoft Teams can handle 20, 30, 40 people. We have meetings where we have literally tens of people in a major board meeting, and Teams holds up just fine. But again, that's zero use to a family trying to share a little bit of human contact during these terrible times. Zero use. So out there in the normal world, Zoom is popular because it's easy to use and it just works. So of course people are going to use it. It's so valuable. But you do need to be a little bit careful, because there's a couple of things going on with Zoom. And I want to make some criticisms and I want to defend them in some ways. So there's a few things going on. So the first thing is, all software is written by humans. So all software will have bugs. And so the fact that there were bugs found in Zoom doesn't disturb me in any way. That's normal, right? Everything has bugs because we human beings make bugs. What matters is how you respond. And last summer, when that web server was found, Zoom responded horribly. They were defensive. They denied it. They insisted it wasn't a problem. They didn't last very long in that very silly course because the internet collectively told them to cop on, and they had to backpedal, and it was embarrassing, and it was slow, and it was just ick. This week and the week before, that's not how they reacted. They put their hands up, went terribly sorry, and in some cases, they had security patches within 24 hours. There was no denying, there was no pretending it wasn't a problem. They dealt with it, and they dealt with it quickly. So on the whole, that's a much more positive development. Then you can say, oh, but they were only motivated by not wanting to lose money. I don't care. I don't care what the motivation is. They responded appropriately. Now, they also have had some very silly defaults. And it's probably down to carelessness again, where they're just not quite thinking through the implications of their defaults, because particularly if you make your service so easy to use, anyone can use it, you better make darn sure you have good defaults, because you know they're going to be used. These are not technical people. You've intentionally made a product to attract non-technical people. They are not twiddling dials. They are using your defaults. And those defaults were bad. Now, as of a day or two ago, those defaults have been changing, and they've been addressing the shortcomings. So again, good reaction, right? Problem pointed out, responded well. The other thing that's really positive that I want to say hats off, they reacted to this by announcing a freeze on new features for 90 days so they can consolidate what they have, address the security and privacy issues. Bravo, that is a really positive response to problems. But they do have work to do. So you do need to be careful. And myself and Allison discussed this on Security Bits, which is a segment I do with Allison. And the single best resource I have found is an article by Glenn Fleischman over on Tidbits, where he lists every problem Zoom has had. And you can skip over the detail you don't care about, because every section ends with a heading, what should I do? And they're really short. So what should I do? Nothing. They have patched this. What should I do? Always set a password on your meeting. Here's how. What should I do? Always enable the lobby. Here's how. Right? So it is the single best article I've come across where if you want to know the who and the why and the wherefore, you can. And if all you want to know is what should I do, just skip to those headings and follow the advice. And it's all together on one page.
And I agree. That is, I mean, Glenn, I've read that article, and Glenn did a spectacular job of really digging through everything. And you're right, giving practical, actionable advice. And that's why I guess maybe even after reading that, I didn't feel, I felt like there was a bit of a lot of criticism that was being sent in Zoom's way that was not, was a bit harsh. I mean, some of these things, you know, let's put it this way: hindsight's 20/20, and some of this stuff just seems so obvious that, you know, why didn't you think about that? Well, but on the other hand, looking at some of it, I could have done those same things in the name of making it easy to understand and not maybe thinking through the security part. So I have a hard time. I too have been sort of defending Zoom. You know, yeah, they screwed up a few places, and their response last summer, like a number of tech companies, you know, their response was poor to something that was pointed out. But happily they've learned their lesson, and you know now they're responding appropriately.
Yeah, and if they had responded in the last 2 weeks the way they responded last summer, my criticism would be scathing, and I think deservedly so. But that's not the world we're living in. So I think it's important that if you want anyone to listen to what you say, you need to be fair. And I think they are responding markedly differently, and they should be commended for mostly doing the right thing. And I have some criticisms I could make. In fact, I have one criticism I think I want to make. But on the whole, they have responded so much better. And I think everyone should make their own decision, right? So it has a clear value. Right? Very clearly, there's a value to their product. And it has clear risks. They patched a bunch of bugs. I promise you there are more security vulnerabilities in that source code. And so you know you're taking a risk that that source code probably still has problems in it. They've also made some questionable privacy decisions in the past, so they might do the same in the future. So that's another risk. But the response is so much better this time around. The risk is so much less than it was last summer, I think. but it's not zero. So you need to decide, is this more valuable to me than those risks? And I think for a lot of reasonable people, the answer is yes. Yes, there's more value here than there is risk. Value is very much above zero. The risk can't be zero. But nonetheless, I think reasonable people can very easily come to the conclusion, this is a risk I'm prepared to take because it's not gigantic and it is valuable. Now, one of the things, they scored an own goal I want to call them out on because it underlines my philosophy on how to think, how to make that value call. How do you decide how you feel about a company? And I have a very simple rule for this. Follow the money, right? Money is what drives corporations. It sets the incentives and companies follow incentives. Why did Facebook do so many creepy things? Because they are incentivized to be exactly as creepy as they can get away with, but no more. And so their incentives are always pushing them to find the edge, to invade as much of your privacy as they can get away with, but no more. And that results in scandal after scandal after scandal, but never quite enough to bring them under. Then you look at Wikipedia, they're a charitable foundation. Their motivations are completely different because they're trying to attract donations. So it's in their interest to be as transparent as possible, to be as open as possible. So all the edits on their pages, everything their moderators do, there's an action log anyone can see. Every controversial page, its full edit history is there. So they're incentivized extremely differently because when you follow the money, that's what happens. So then you ask the question, where's the money with Zoom? Well, their model is primarily a freemium model, which is actually quite a positive model. It's a model that made Dropbox so successful. It's the model that could have made Evernote successful if they hadn't have made their product bad. Evernote managed to make the world's best note-taking app and then make it worse and worse and worse. Let's not go there. But Dropbox is the perfect example. They did the math, and if they convert, I think I heard an interview with their CEO, if they convert 1% of their users to paying users, they will make a spectacular profit. So they're offering a really nice paid service and a decent free service in the hope that they will, carrot-wise, encourage you to pay them. So that's the freemium model. And Zoom's primary source of income is corporations getting corporate accounts. And so their free tier is there to encourage you to buy their enterprise tier. And that's the freemium model, and that's a business model that sets up really positive incentives. But they decided to have their cake and eat it, and they also decided to try have a data mining model where they could sell data for profit too if they needed to. And that resulted in some of the privacy mess-ups. Now, they never followed through on that business model. They never went down that road, but they always kept it open to themselves. And they wrote their terms of service to keep it open. And they wrote their software to keep it open. And if only they hadn't, they didn't go that route. They don't need to go that route. They have a good business without that route. If only they hadn't done that, I'd have much less criticism and they'd probably have a better product.
This edition of MacVoices is supported by Linode. You can build it on Linode. By visiting linode.com/MacVoices, you can take $20 off your first server package. So what are you buying? You are buying a service that delivers dedicated CPUs, distributed applications, hosted websites, and CI/CD environments. You are buying native SSD storage, a 40 gigabit network, and industry-leading processors, so your website or hosted service will be as fast as possible and as responsive as possible. You are buying a spot in one of Linode's 10 worldwide data centers, including the newest in Mumbai. You are buying their new Cloud Manager feature with an improved user interface. You are buying one-click installs of things like WordPress, Minecraft, VPNs, and much more. That's what you're buying when you visit linode.com/MacVoices, and you get $20 off your first server package to boot. Get your next project off the ground and into the cloud at linode.com/MacVoices. Thanks to Linode for their support of MacVoices. Oh, I gotta fight you a little bit.
Okay, no, please do. Please do.
Okay. It's in their terms of service. So it's not like they were doing it behind anybody's back.
That is also true. But the thing is, they also haven't actually followed through on any of this, which makes it just silly. So they have it in their terms of service that they can collect this data, but they never went around to selling it. So If they hadn't have had it in the terms of service, if they hadn't have been doing it, they would have had no difference to their current profit, but they would have had a much more privacy-oriented product.
But looking at it from a business standpoint, I could have done that too, because okay, let's keep the option open. We don't have to go and do it, but I'd rather, because it would be a whole different matter to have that shut off and then come back and say, we've updated our terms of service and we're going to gather this information. That would have been a sure death.
You're right. You can't reverse into that, right? You're right. You can't reverse into that business model. That's a business model that you start off with, or you never get to. You can't back into it.
Or it's a sure death. No question.
So I would make the counter argument that they could have an alternative universe, right? Spending someone else's money. It's great fun because it has no risk. But let's spend someone else's money, right? Let's pretend I'm the CEO of Zoom. An alternative reality would have been, don't keep the door open to that creepy business model. Instead, do an Apple and double down on the privacy aspect and make it a selling point that you're not keeping that business model open, and use that to maximize your profit the other way.
And I think that's a great option. It's a choice. It's a choice. And unfortunately, I don't know the deep dark history of Zoom as far as exactly when it started and all. But I think the whole privacy thing, the privacy thing has not been as important as it's becoming. I mean, I think every week for the past 2-3 years, it's just become more and more and more important. And probably when some of these projects were conceived, that was not there. I mean, the concern over privacy was just not nobody was aware of this stuff. I mean,
yeah, but it's been 2 years since Cambridge Analytica, so that excuse is wearing thinner.
Well, I would agree, but again, if I've already created the business model and it's in my terms of service, and you and I have agreed to that, we've agreed to, let's not. We got to take some responsibility here.
Technically, legally, that's true. But if it isn't informed consent, and a lot of this stuff is not informed consent, that's kind of my big bugbear with Facebook, is that it's very much uninformed consent. Yes, it's legally speaking, you've accepted the terms of service, but they're written in language that's human hostile intentionally. They're long. They're not designed to be clear and obvious. They're not designed to give informed consent.
Well, I do not disagree with that, and we could sit here and slander lawyers all we want, but
no, it's not lawyers. I don't think that's fair. I think lawyers can write clear terms. They're often instructed not to.
Yes, absolutely, or they choose not to. I mean, that's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah, let's not go there.
Yeah, but again, that's where I get really upset. Before we started the show, we were talking about some of the irresponsible reporting on COVID-19, and I find some of this reporting on these issues just as disturbing, because you're not giving me the facts. Okay, the fact is that when I signed up for Zoom, I agreed to this. Somewhere I had to, sooner or later, one way or another, I had to click a terms of service, and if I didn't read it, shame on me. I mean, somewhere there's a line between black and white. And this one, okay, so I wish the line had been over here, but it wasn't. It was over here, but I still clicked it and I still used the service. So
yeah, you're not factually wrong, right? But no, you're not, right?
But yeah.
But I will argue that unless you have a very clear human readable, here's what you're agreeing to, I don't think you've effectively had consent. You may legally have consent, but I don't think you genuinely have consent. And under the GDPR in Europe, it's a legal requirement that your terms be clear and understandable, and they have to be concise. And so a lot of this stuff, if it were to end up hauled in front of a court in Europe, would not do very well. But the GDPR is taking time to get bedded in and to have teeth on these kind of things. But in theory, you could sue these companies for not being clear enough about their terms of service. And that will start to happen over time. But again, your definition of clear, my definition of clear. Bleh. But I think it's important to say that a lot of the consent we have is legally there, but not ethically there.
I could swing with that, probably about 80%, 85%.
Yeah, I mean, we can argue about degree, right? Because you're right. There's personal
Yeah.
responsibility and there's corporate responsibility, and somewhere in there, there's a line. And I really think that a lot of the stuff, the companies are not being upfront with us, and we're being lazy. But meet us
Right.
halfway.
But I would submit to you that, and I'm not going to call any names. I so badly want to call names, but I'm not going to call names. But probably 90%, and I don't think that's much of an exaggeration. In fact, it might be low, of the terms of service that I've clicked on are humanly understandable and would probably meet the GDPR test that you just alluded to.
How short were they? Because a lot of the stuff I see is like, the scroll bar is teeny tiny, and that's certainly not in keeping with the GDPR, where you need to have a short, clear summary of what you're agreeing to.
Right. I mean, and
Apple
that's
would
it.
be an example. Apple would be an example of a company that does it very well. And one of the things Apple have done that is extremely good is they have a logo, which is the two people shaking hands in blue. Anytime they want your consent, you will see that logo. And it's a really good mnemonic. If I see this logo, I should pay attention because I'm agreeing to hand something over. And what it is I'm handing over always fits on one screen. Right? You're always agreeing to something concise and understandable. And you're agreeing because that logo says, I am agreeing to something. Right. And the more people copy that, start every photocopier in Redmond, start every photocopier in Palo Alto or wherever all these other companies are headquartered. If everyone were to copy that approach, I think we'd all be living in a world where it's much easier to have these discussions. Because in that world, if you don't read it, it's not the company's fault. Like, if you don't read Apple's terms, I'm sorry, but that's your fault and you have no right to complain. They met you not just halfway. They met you 3/4 of the way and you just had a quarter to go and you couldn't be bothered.
Agreed. There's so many other things I wanted to get to, and we never got to them because this was fun, and I hope folks got a lot out of this because I enjoy these back and forths. I don't disagree with you completely, and I know you don't agree with me completely. So I think that is a pretty good draw. I hope we both made the points that people need to be aware of some of this stuff and taking some responsibility for themselves, and just like anything else, just look before you click. The old.
Can we make some sort of Latin, caveat emptor, per buyer beware, clickier emptor? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Caveat clicker. Actually, the caveat is the beware bit because Latin's backwards. Caveat clicker. I don't know, but yeah, be careful when you click. I mean, it's not all on them, right? There's shared responsibility, and I think where you and I might disagree is on where the lion's share of blame lies at the moment. But the point is, it's both sides have a responsibility here. No one gets a free ride here.
Yeah, exactly. Bart, we will do this again, and it will not be so long in between. But for right now, where can folks find you, reach you? I know you do more than just a couple of little things, so we want to make sure we get them all here so folks know what else you do and where they can catch up with you.
I think the single easiest thing to do, because my surname is very difficult to spell, let alone pronounce, is to go to bartb.ie, where I link out to everything I do. And that's at least a memorable URL. So bartb.ie, I save you spelling the hard bit.
Well, now come on, you got to give us more. Because when you go there, you're going to find...
So the thing I definitely want to plug the most is I do 2 podcasts. They're both monthly. So there's one every 2 weeks. There's a monthly photography show, which is very varied in format. I have no rules in that show. It's about the art and craft of photography. It's not a gear show. And other than that, anything goes. So at the moment, I'm doing a mini series where I'm inviting photographers on to evangelize a photographer of their choice that they're passionate about. It can be anyone who's photographed any time between the invention of photography and now. So we have 2 of them published so far. Walker Evans, evangelized by Antonio Rosario, and Jeff Carlson from the Photoactive podcast did Pete Souza, who was the staff photographer or the White House photographer for both Reagan and Obama, which is quite the contrast of people he photographed. And that body of work is fascinating for the very reason that it spans those 2 eras. And he managed to get human photographs of both of those men and some of the best photographs of Reagan, actually. for a time when social media wasn't a thing and the human side of the president wasn't seen. I mean, there's one of them of him throwing a paper airplane off a skyscraper in Dallas, which I just think is wonderful. I've never looked at the man the same way. So that's the photography show, and sometimes it's me explaining a technical term, sometimes it's a panel show, sometimes it's me interviewing someone, and right now we're evangelizing photographers. It could be anything, but it's art and craft, not gear. And then the other one is a monthly Apple show where the intention is we try to focus on the forest, not the trees. So there are lots of daily Apple news shows that get into the fine detail. But once a month in Let's Talk Apple, we stand back and we try to analyze the big picture. How is the Apple world different at the end of January than it was at the start of January, at the end of February than it was at the start of February? And I think that's a niche that other people aren't filling, and I'm finding it very rewarding to look at the news in that way. It's a different way of seeing things, and it can be fascinating to see the trends develop that way that you wouldn't see if you're stuck in the weeds each and every day. So that's Let's Talk Apple and Let's Talk Photography. So they're the biggest things to look for at bartb.ie.
But there's more. So go and visit Bart's site and look for both courses with Allison Sheridan as well, because I think those are great ways to help you get through some of the lockdown and get something out of it as well. Bart, thank you. This has been a whole lot of fun, and we will do it again. And at least it wasn't the gift show. So we're gonna do more of these direct ones, just us.
Yeah, absolutely, Chuck. I am completely game. I've always been a bit afraid of video, but I don't think I look too ugly. I think we've gotten away with it. So
I think we're doing just fine. Thanks again.
Very good. Well, in that case, adios. Talk to you soon, and stay well, everyone.
Definitely. Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices. I hope you got a lot of out of both sections of this. This was a very diverse conversation, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope you did too. Until the next time, and as always, thanks for watching and stay safe. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you MacVoices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.